Well, good afternoon, everyone. We're hailing from my office today, next door to the chapel, but that's okay. We can roll with that. We like people using the chapel, so we are allowing a guest to use it today. So, excuse me. Today we are looking at day 2 of Samson and the law of solid ground. And so we're looking forward to today's lesson. Again, this week, being that Samson serves as a negative example, it's a good, some good lessons that we learn from his life. And so with that, we'll move into our lesson today. Very important leadership thought for today. There are always signs when a leader is not on solid ground. It doesn't just happen overnight. There are signposts in the road. Warning, warning, and we're about to get to that in just a minute. So just keep in mind there are always signs when a leader is not on solid ground. So to introduce our time today, warning, danger ahead. Samson had time to turn himself around, yet he didn't. Judges 14 through 15 outlines much of his impetuous behavior and the fruit of his poor character. Yet the passage ends saying of Samson, he judged Israel 20 years in the days of the Philistines. So when we look at Samson's life, and you see a pattern of negative behavior that spelled trouble. Now this happened both in terms of his relationship with God and also his leadership of people. In fact, no leader ends up out of bounds without first passing signposts that indicate he is straying on dangerous territory. So that's from, of course, the book 21 Most Powerful Minutes on a Leader's Day by John Maxwell. So let's look then at these signs that John talks about, signs of leaders in trouble. So there are 5 signs. We'll mention them first and then look at them in greater depth, one at a time. So here are the signs of a leader in trouble. Number 1, fail to address glaring character weaknesses. And Samson wonderfully, quote unquote, illustrates all of these points. First, so again, failing to address glaring character weaknesses. Second, count on deception to safeguard themselves. Third, leaders in trouble act impulsively. Fourth, they misuse their God-given gifts. And then finally, they are overcome because of an area of weakness. So let's look at all of these in greater depth. This issue of failing to address glaring character weaknesses. Again, let's look at Samson. Obviously, if you read those 4 chapters in Judges, we find that Samson had a major problem with sexual impurity. First, he disobeyed God's command to only marry a Hebrew woman when he demanded that his parents get him a Philistine woman that, quote unquote, pleased him well. In other words, he liked the way she looked. Then, after this, Samuel slept with prostitutes. And finally, everything fell apart for Samson when he established a relationship with Delilah. So a key point here in this one of 5 points is this. If a leader fails to repair character flaws, those flaws will get larger and ultimately erode the leader's moral foundation. Moving along, and this kind of flows from the first one in a sense, people who flirt with disobedience often resort to deception to protect themselves from the consequences. I bet all of us know people, don't mention any names out there, but you probably have an image of someone who comes to mind of people with behavior that's less than ideal and then using deception to try to escape from the consequences. So Samson did that. We see in the biblical text that he used riddles to try to trick people. And then when he had an affair with Delilah, He lied to her 3 times about the source of his supernatural strength. In a sense, unfortunately for him, he told her the real reason on the 4th time, and that didn't go too well. But anyway, we have a key point here that when a leader twists the truth, it is a sure sign that the leader is headed for trouble. Next, we turn to this issue of acting impulsively. And by that, what we really mean is not thinking through the consequences of an action, just kind of acting and not even really considering one way or the other that there might be a consequence attached to it. For instance, Samuel chose his wife very rashly. He didn't consider the potential consequences of revealing the riddle to his wife when she badgered him until he gave up the answer, and then she went, of course, and told the Philistines, who then told him. We see several examples where he engaged in bloody battles simply due to his impulsiveness, which then brings us to this next key point, that leaders who cannot control their tempers are a danger to themselves and others. Notice there that we didn't say leaders who have tempers, we said leaders who can't control them. Every now and then, it can actually be a good thing to lose your temper, but we're talking about people who constantly do not or cannot control their temper. They can be like a forest fire that burns everything up around them, to say the least. Okay. From this issue of impulsiveness, we then turn to the issue of misusing our God-given gifts. Samson, and we mentioned this last time, yesterday, Samson took both his anointing and his strength for granted. And when we see this, as he dealt with Delilah and 3 different times told her a lie, about how his strength could be taken away from him. And it was obvious when he told her the last time, and it was true, he didn't even know that God had left him. He thought he would just get up like he did before, and that nothing different would happen the 4th time as what happened the first 3. But of course, he found out differently. Then Samson used his supernatural strength to exact revenge on the Philistines. That was the occasion where he caught the 300 foxes and he tied their tails together, and then put a torch between the tails of the foxes so that it would set the fields of the Philistines on fire. Well, what happened then is that the Philistines found out that Samson did it. They found out who his, at this point, former wife was and her father. They killed them instead of Samson. So again, a leader's actions will often have implications not just for that leader, but will also produce consequences for other people as well. So Samuel illustrates the principle that misusing resources and or God's gifts to us always brings about unwanted and probably unexpected consequences. So the last danger sign or sign of danger is this area of overcoming. They're overcome because of an area of weakness. Samson kept tempting fate until he finally met his match with Delilah. Samson was the deceiver, yet Delilah deceived him. Now, Samson knew that Delilah was really working for the Philistines. Because if you remember in the story, she would always say, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." And it was obvious that she kept telling them what his secret was, albeit the first 3 times it wasn't true. But even though Samson knew that she was working for the Philistines, he still continued to play these foolish games. But of course, what happened is that she eventually wore him down. And then finally, he told her the truth. And as we just pointed out, he thought that nothing would change. But in fact, the text tells us that something very dramatic did change, and that was that God's Spirit that allowed him to exercise the gift of his supernatural strength, the Spirit left him, and he became like an ordinary person. And so they captured him, they gouged out his eyes, and not only did they really make sport of him, but because he was the leader of Israel in a vicarious way, that also tarnished the reputation of both the nation of Israel and of God, because they were worshiping their false god, Dagon, in their temple when they captured Samson. So again, it reminds us of a really key point, really a couple of key points. Number one, that those who don't deal with their sin and character flaws will be consumed by them. But then secondly, which we mentioned just prior, that our issues, especially when we are in leadership, will impact other people. It won't just be ourselves that gets hurt by these things. And so as we begin to wind down today, consider this statement to conclude our time. Some people like to believe that their private imperfections won't have public consequences, but they always do. Leaders cannot escape who they truly are, and what they do in the dark comes out in the light. If what they do is good, it builds character in the leader and trust in the people. Now that is a dynamic duo if I've ever heard of one. Building character in the leader and trust in the people. But conversely, if it's bad, then it undermines everything they do until there is no solid ground left for them to stand on. And so think about these 5 issues that we have talked about, and I'll go over them again real quickly as we lead into our question for the day. Consider these 5 signs: failure to address glaring character weaknesses, counting on deception to safeguard yourself from consequences, acting impulsively, misusing God-given gifts, and being overcome by an area of weakness. Those are the 5 things we've looked at this afternoon. And so I want to skip ahead then to our question for the day. Are any of these signs of trouble present in your life? So think through those things. Ask yourself, or maybe they're present in someone that you really care about, and you might take a look at this and maybe share this with them. It's so important to be aware of these signs. And like we mentioned at the outset, you don't fall off the wagon, so to speak, without there being these warning signs along the way. And so it's important when you see these signs to take action immediately. Don't wait until it's too late. That's what happened with Samson. And so we have his example to teach us that we don't have to wait until it's too late, that we can deal with these issues right away. But of course, before we can deal with them, we have to admit that we have them. And so that's why we end today with this question and invite all of us to do some reflection on those 5 points and ask ourselves, do we have any struggle with any of them? And also perhaps with someone that we care about to consider the same questions. So we look forward to seeing you back tomorrow, and pray God's blessing on you. Until then, we'll see you next time. God bless you.